I've had the most inspiring morning with the Anaphora Centre discussing.
The state banquet was meant to be an evening of elegance, royal tradition, and flawless diplomacy. Every guest expected smiles, perfect etiquette, and a united royal family. But everything changed in a single silent moment. Princess Catherine suddenly noticed something that immediately caught her attention. Pinned to Queen Camilla's gown was a brooch that Catherine recognized instantly. It wasn't just another royal jewel. It was Princess Diana's brooch. Not one that looked similar. Not a replica. The very same piece that Catherine believed should never be worn without William's approval or deep family respect. For a brief second, Catherine remained completely still. The room continued as normal, yet for her, time seemed to stop. Across the table, Camilla slowly realized Catherine had noticed the brooch. Almost instinctively, her hand moved toward it, as though checking that it was still in place. Prince William followed Catherine's gaze. The moment he saw the jewel, his expression quietly changed. To everyone else, it may have looked like an elegant accessory. But to William, it represented his mother's memory. It represented loss. It represented Diana. This wasn't an ordinary royal dinner. A state banquet is one of the monarchy's most important official events, designed to welcome distinguished international guests while displaying unity and stability. King Charles wanted tonight to project exactly that image. A calm, united royal family. Catherine understood the importance of the occasion better than anyone. She knew interrupting such an event could create headlines around the world. Yet she also knew remaining silent carried its own price. If no one spoke, Diana's legacy could once again be overshadowed. Under the table, William quietly reached for Catherine's hand. Not to stop her. Simply to reassure her. Catherine gently pulled her hand away. That tiny movement told William everything he needed to know. She wasn't reacting out of anger. She was acting from conviction. Camilla looked back toward Catherine. For the first time that evening, uncertainty appeared on her face. King Charles quickly sensed the growing tension. His expression tightened. The carefully planned atmosphere of the evening suddenly felt fragile. Then something happened that no one in the banquet hall expected. Princess Catherine slowly rose from her chair. The conversations faded. Servers paused. Guests turned toward the royal table. Half a second later, William also stood beside her. Not in front of her. Not behind her. Beside her. Then Catherine calmly requested that the banquet service be paused. Silence filled the room. Camilla froze. Charles immediately realized this was no longer a minor misunderstanding. Something much bigger had just begun. And before anyone fully understood why Catherine had stopped the evening, the true significance of Diana's brooch was about to come to light. Inside that banquet hall, the brooch carried a different meaning for every member of the royal family. For Camilla, it appeared to symbolize acceptance and a fresh beginning. For King Charles, it was an uncomfortable reminder of a chapter the monarchy had never fully escaped. For Prince William, it represented his mother's memory being brought back into the spotlight at the worst possible moment. And for Princess Catherine, it marked a boundary that should never have been crossed. Catherine remained standing, her expression calm, yet the sadness in her eyes was impossible to ignore. Over the years, she had honored Diana's legacy with quiet respect. She never used Diana's name for attention. Never treated her memory as a public performance. That was exactly why this moment felt so painful. To Catherine, Diana wasn't simply a beloved royal figure from history. She was William's mother. The woman whose absence continued to shape his life, his decisions, and the way he protected his own family. William looked once more at the brooch. His jaw tightened. Everyone close to him understood that anything connected to Diana carried deep emotional meaning. Royal jewelry was never just decoration. Within the palace, every piece told a story. Every jewel carried history. And this particular brooch carried emotions that had never truly faded. An event meant to celebrate unity had suddenly become a reminder of old wounds. Camilla tried to maintain her composure. She sat upright, keeping her expression steady, pretending nothing unusual had happened. But one small gesture betrayed her confidence. Her fingers briefly touched the brooch before quickly moving away. Several people near the royal table noticed. King Charles shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His concern became increasingly obvious. He knew discussions about Diana's jewelry had already created tension behind palace doors weeks earlier. More importantly, He knew Catherine would never interrupt royal protocol without a very serious reason. Charles glanced first toward William, then toward Camilla. The weight of the past suddenly seemed impossible to ignore. Catherine slowly turned toward William. Neither of them needed to speak. One look was enough. William's silence revealed everything she needed to know. His pain strengthened her resolve to remain standing, despite every expectation that she should simply sit down and allow the evening to continue. Just then, Sophie quietly leaned closer to Catherine. In a soft voice, she shared something unexpected. "This isn't the first time that brooch has caused concern." Catherine didn't answer, but her expression changed. William noticed it. Charles noticed it. Even Camilla sensed that something had shifted. Sophie's quiet remark pointed back to a private family meeting held several weeks before the banquet. A meeting where Diana's personal jewelry had been carefully reviewed for an upcoming memorial tribute. During that discussion, Catherine had made one heartfelt request. She asked that Diana's brooch remain untouched until William himself decided how and when it should be used. What happened during that private meeting would soon explain why Catherine reacted so strongly the moment she saw the brooch that evening. Catherine could still remember that private family meeting with remarkable clarity. The gathering had been quiet, limited to only a few trusted members of the royal family. They had come together to discuss a future tribute honoring Princess Diana's legacy. Every decision carried emotional weight. Every item connected to Diana held a story. William entered the room already carrying visible tension. Anything connected to his mother was never simply history. For him, it was deeply personal. It was childhood memories, heartbreak, and a loss that time had never truly healed. Sophie remained beside Catherine throughout the meeting, carefully observing every conversation. When a velvet presentation case was placed on the table, complete silence filled the room. Inside rested several of Diana's treasured personal pieces. William never reached toward the case. He simply looked at it. His silence spoke louder than words. A short time later, Camilla's name entered the discussion. According to information later shared within palace circles, she had expressed interest in wearing Diana's brooch during the upcoming state banquet. Her intention, it was said, was to present a public image of harmony and reconciliation. But Catherine saw the request very differently. To her, genuine unity could never be created by wearing something so closely connected to another woman's memory, especially without the blessing of the people who loved her most. That same evening, William privately spoke with King Charles. He respectfully explained that Diana's brooch should remain safely preserved until he personally decided its future place within his mother's legacy. Charles listened carefully, but he offered no definite answer. That silence unsettled Catherine more than an outright refusal would have. She understood that difficult family decisions often required patience. But this situation felt different. The king knew how emotionally significant the brooch was. Yet no clear decision had been made. Later, Sophie quietly informed Catherine that Camilla's request was still being considered. Catherine wasn't upset because someone admired the brooch. She was troubled because Diana's memory seemed to be treated as something available for public symbolism. Meanwhile, William left the meeting visibly disappointed. Although he said very little, Catherine understood exactly how deeply the situation had affected him. That painful conversation stayed with her. Which was why, the moment she saw the brooch pinned to Camilla's gown during the banquet, everything suddenly made sense. The warning had gone unheard. The private concerns had been ignored. William now found himself facing one of his mother's most personal symbols before an audience of international guests. That realization explained why Catherine had risen from her chair. It wasn't a spontaneous reaction. It was the result of weeks of quiet concern finally reaching its breaking point. The banquet had simply become the moment when those private emotions could no longer remain hidden. The banquet hall remained unusually quiet. No one dared to interrupt the growing tension between the senior royals. Princess Catherine stood calmly, her eyes fixed on Camilla. Finally, she broke the silence with one simple question. "Why are you wearing it?" Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Those 4 words instantly changed the atmosphere inside the room. Every guest understood that this was no longer about royal jewelry. It had become something far more personal. Camilla tried to answer with confidence. She explained that the brooch had been chosen as a symbol of unity, a gesture meant to show that the past should remain in the past. But even before she finished speaking, Uncertainty crept into her voice. Catherine listened carefully. Then she responded with quiet composure. Some memories aren't symbols. They belong to the people who still carry them. The room fell silent once again. William slowly stepped forward until he was standing beside Catherine. He didn't interrupt. He didn't attempt to calm the situation. His presence alone showed exactly where he stood. Everyone could see the emotion written across his face. For William, this wasn't simply about protocol. It was about protecting the memory of his mother. King Charles leaned slightly toward Camilla. In a low voice, he quietly instructed her to remove the brooch. The request wasn't public, but those seated closest to the royal table clearly understood what had been said. Camilla hesitated, only for a brief moment. Yet that hesitation spoke louder than any explanation. Catherine noticed it immediately. William noticed it too. Even Charles realized that those few seconds had made the situation considerably worse. Eventually, Camilla reached toward the brooch. Her hand trembled ever so slightly as she carefully unfastened it from her gown. By then, however, the damage had already been done. The evening would never return to normal. Just then, Princess Anne quietly approached King Charles. Without raising her voice, she offered a firm warning. This isn't about the brooch anymore. It's about judgment. Charles remained silent. Deep down, he knew and was right. The issue had grown far beyond one piece of jewelry. It had become a question of respect, family trust, and Diana's lasting legacy. Inside that magnificent banquet hall, something invisible had shifted. For the first time that evening, Catherine wasn't simply following royal protocol. She had become the person defending a memory that millions of people still held close to their hearts. And everyone present could feel that the night had permanently changed. By the following morning, news of the interrupted banquet had spread far beyond the palace. Although no official details had been released, speculation quickly began growing. People wanted to know one thing. What had happened inside that banquet hall? Within royal circles, the conversation centered around one image. Princess Catherine standing calmly, Prince William beside her, and Queen Camilla no longer wearing Diana's brooch. Inside Buckingham Palace, senior advisors gathered early. Everyone understood that the situation could no longer be ignored. A carefully worded public response was discussed. But Charles knew a simple statement would never answer the deeper questions. The issue wasn't only about jewelry. It was about trust, respect, and Diana's lasting legacy. William remained firm. He believed his mother's personal belongings should never become symbols without the family's full agreement. Princess Anne supported him without hesitation. She reminded palace officials that certain royal items carry emotional meaning far beyond their historical value. Catherine stayed away from the growing media attention. She made no public comments. She gave no interviews. Her silence reflected the same dignity she had shown throughout the entire evening. That quiet approach only strengthened public respect for her. Meanwhile, Camilla found herself facing difficult private conversations. Looking back, she admitted she had underestimated how deeply the brooch would affect William and Catherine. Her original intention may have been reconciliation, but the result had been exactly the opposite. King Charles listened carefully as each family member shared their perspective. The discussion remained respectful. Yet everyone agreed on one important point. Situations like this could never be allowed to happen again. Later that afternoon, Charles approved a new internal review covering the handling of Diana's personal jewelry collection. Every request, every approval, and every future appearance would now require much stricter oversight. It wasn't simply a policy change. It was recognition that Diana's legacy still deserved extraordinary care. As the palace slowly returned to its usual routine, one truth had become impossible to ignore. The interrupted banquet would be remembered for far more than its distinguished guests. It would be remembered as the evening when Princess Catherine quietly reminded the royal family that some memories should never be treated as ordinary tradition. As the day continued, the atmosphere inside the palace felt noticeably different. The banquet had officially ended. But its impact was only beginning. Behind closed doors, senior royal aides quietly reviewed every step that had led to the incident. Who approved the brooch? Who authorized its use? And why had William's earlier concerns not been fully addressed? Those questions quickly became the center of every private discussion. King Charles requested a complete review of the approval process. He wanted every detail examined before another misunderstanding could damage the family's reputation. William welcomed the decision. For him, this had never been about assigning blame. It was about protecting something deeply personal. His mother's memory deserved care, not convenience. Princess Catherine continued her daily royal duties without mentioning the banquet. She smiled during public appearances. She greeted visitors with her usual warmth. But those closest to her could see that the previous evening still weighed heavily on her heart. Princess and privately praised Catherine's restraint. She believed Catherine had handled an impossible situation with remarkable dignity. Rather than creating conflict, she had defended a principle that many people quietly respected. Camilla also reflected on everything that had happened. She understood that intentions alone could never erase emotional consequences. Some royal symbols carried memories that belonged first to family before they belonged to history. That realization stayed with her. Later that evening, William and Catherine spent time together away from palace meetings. Neither spoke much. They didn't need long conversations. Sometimes silence carried greater understanding than words. William quietly thanked Catherine. Not for stopping the banquet, but for standing beside him when it mattered most. Catherine simply smiled. She reminded him that protecting Diana's legacy was never his responsibility alone. They would always do it together. Meanwhile, King Charles finalized one important decision. From that day forward, any personal item connected to Princess Diana would require direct consultation with the immediate family before appearing at an official royal event. It wasn't announced publicly. But inside the palace, everyone understood its significance. The banquet had changed more than one evening. It had changed the way Diana's legacy would be protected for years to come. The days that followed brought a new sense of calm inside the palace. The headlines slowly faded. The banquet returned to history. But the lesson from that evening remained. Princess Catherine never spoke publicly about the incident. She never criticized anyone. She never tried to explain her actions. She simply continued carrying out her royal duties with the quiet confidence people had come to admire. That silence spoke louder than any interview ever could. Prince William stood beside her every step of the way. For him, the issue had never been about a single brooch. It had always been about protecting the memory of his mother. A memory that deserved respect, not interpretation. King Charles also accepted that some royal traditions required more than protocol. They required understanding. And above all, they required sensitivity toward the people still carrying those memories. Camilla quietly accepted the family's new decision. She understood that some symbols could never belong equally to everyone. Certain pieces would always remain deeply connected to Diana's legacy and to those who loved her most. Princess and later shared one final thought with Catherine. Sometimes protecting the crown means protecting its memories first. Those simple words stayed with Catherine long after the banquet was over. In many ways, that evening became about far more than royal jewelry. It became a reminder that true leadership isn't measured by titles or ceremonies. It's measured by knowing when to defend what truly matters. The brooch eventually returned to secure storage. But the conversation it started continued throughout the palace. Future decisions involving Diana's personal collection would now be approached with greater care, greater respect, and greater family consultation. For William, it meant his mother's legacy would remain protected. For Charles, it became a valuable lesson. For Camilla, it brought a deeper understanding. And for Princess Catherine, it became the moment many believed she quietly proved why she represents the future of the monarchy. Not through power, not through authority, but through dignity, compassion, and unwavering respect for the memories that should never be forgotten. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more royal updates. We'll see you in the next video.